Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to change a bit about automation, and this is based on a project I did with a customer a couple of years ago, and the problems that I ran into because I didn't fully think about the consequences of what automation meant for them and for the people who work there and to their workflow. So I hope I can help you with this, so you can make fewer mistakes than I did. Yep. So that's me. I'm from the Netherlands. Started working in the internet industry in '95, starting a small ISP. You know, some modem banks and a small Cisco 2500 router, and the good old days like that. Got a master in computer science, was the RIPE address policy working group chair for about 11 years. Also one of the founders of the IPv6 Foundation in the Netherlands. Currently one of the founders and board members of the Global NOC Alliance, where we help NOCs and do free web hosting and event management software and whatever we can, basically. Working for SixConnect as a senior engineer, doing everything from helping with software development to automation to you name it. And I'm currently also an NRO NC, which is also the ASO AC, to give two different names to the same thing, member. And that is like an ICANN function where we're actually working on the successor to ICP2, like how to set up an RAR and how to maintain it and stuff like that. So as you can see, I've been doing a lot of different things over the years. So this is the basic advice I give people when we're talking about automation. You don't need to do everything all at once, but it can be really useful to make basic things consistent, like make sure all the host names are set correctly, DNS settings are correct, you use the right radius or LDAP server, like all the basic small things that you just want the same everywhere. Those are really easy targets for automation. So that's usually how it starts. So you have a couple of routers. You make a little playbook to apply some templates. You run the playbook. All the routers get updated. So if you change an IP address of your DNS server, you run Ansible, and all your router configurations are updated. So easy, quick success. But then you go a bit further, like, okay, maybe we also configure OSPF and BGP, and of course we're doing prefix lists and filtering, and we start doing ACLs for certain things, for management interfaces, for customers, and your Ansible playbook grows and grows and becomes more encompassing, like everything, not just the basic defaults, but actually it becomes part of your operations workflow. And then, of course, you need to get operations data. So Netbox, Nautobot is a very commonly used tool to store hosts, routers, interfaces, patch cables, everything like that. Peering Manager for BGP sessions and filtering. You may have some internal systems where you pull some data from. And of course, this all goes into Ansible, and Ansible collects it, runs all the different playbooks, and your systems get updated. Really nice, really cool. But at that point, you start running into challenges. Because by now, your playbooks have grown so much, a lot of is going on. So maybe you only want to update the BGP pairs, but not the rest yet, because that's still a different project that's still in progress. So you could break down your playbooks and make smaller playbooks, one for this bit of the config, one for that bit of the config, but then you get things spread out all over the place. Or you can use one big playbook but give tags, so you can say like, okay, run this playbook, but only the BGP bit. I did that for a while. But you also are pulling in all this data from Netbox, Peering Manager, and other sources. What about if while you are running it, your colleague is making changes? like if you're pulling in the live data, suddenly if you don't coordinate it properly, then you're already deploying changes that aren't ready yet. So maybe you can break the network like that because they already updated one side but, of a link, but not the other side, so suddenly you're pushing bad configuration. And I've run into that, and a colleague was like, oh yeah, hold on running Ansible for a bit, I'm still busy, you can run it tomorrow. Well, in a small team you might get away with that, but you get all these coordination problems and people become really unhappy. So when you get a situation like this where you're pulling data from live data from Netbox, like, are you really sure you still know what's going on? Like for projects where I'm the only main admin, it's fine. I update Netbox, I run Ansible, that's okay. But when you start working in a bigger team, especially when that team is like 10, 20 people large, people are working on different projects in different parts of the network, you really don't know what everybody else is doing, and the chances of accidentally pushing a bad config suddenly become much larger. So that's like undoing the whole benefit of automation. Like you want automation to have everything nice and consistent and predictable. At this point, I was like, yeah, I have no idea what exactly is happening. As long as I stay in control and I tell other people to back off, then I can keep it under control. But the moment people start using this every day in their normal work, it becomes a mess. Now, the colleague I upset the most when I was doing this was the change manager. Because their job was, they got tickets of changes that need to be made to the network, and they would go like, right, so one person is updating this cluster over there, while the other one is working on that fiber optic or backbone, and he just was looking where everything was changing to make sure that you wouldn't accidentally like have one person working on a primary link while the other person was bringing the backup link down. You know, that's way too much risk. So their job was to make sure that all these changes could be done safely. But now we have this automation, and automation is basically, pull all the stuff from Netbox and deploy it to the routers. But what exactly changed in Netbox? You know, do we actually know if we're in the maintenance window at 3 a.m. in the morning, we're going to run Ansible? Can we predict what's going to happen? And the answer was no. And for the change manager, it was like, basically he was getting 20 tickets that said, oh, I'm going to run Ansible at 3 in the morning. Is that okay? No idea. So this became a problem, and it was actually so bad that I presented I was really proud. I built my automation system, and we had, this was actually for a new Juniper-based core network. We were building all the configs, and I was really proud showing them, like, see, you just go to Netbox, you change the core links, and it will automatically provision everything for you. So awesome. And then the change manager was, I hate it. Like, this is total crap. I was like, whoa, you know, I was being really proud that I built this cool system, but then he explained these problems to me, and I was like, yeah, it kind of assumes that your data sources are correct and that nobody accidentally made a mistake somewhere, and that's not realistic. So this is basically what it looked like. Like Netbox, Naudobot, Peering Manager, they're all feeding data straight into Ansible, and then Ansible is deploying that configuration everywhere. So somebody makes a mistake, puts some bad data in, and suddenly you run Ansible and your whole network goes down because there is a stupid conflict somewhere. Like this luckily didn't happen in my case, but it can happen. So yeah, garbage in is garbage out. If somebody makes a typo, you have a problem. And of course, for a big production network, this is just not acceptable. So went back to the change manager and discussed with them what their job was and what they wanted from it. And the main thing is he can't approve changes when the changes are in flux, when they're coming from live databases. So we needed a system to make a snapshot. We were like, okay, we're going to apply these changes at this point in time, and we needed to be able to predict what effect a change would have. So like I said, one thing was when I was just doing it by myself, I was just like, okay, everybody, I'm going to do maintenance tonight. Everybody leave the system alone so it doesn't end up in a weird state. Didn't work. So what I did was add an extra step. So instead of pulling the data into the Ansible playbook's runtime, I actually wrote a script that extracted the data from all the different systems, put them in YAML files, and YAML is the file format that Ansible uses as its source, and then told Ansible to use those files instead of live data. You can actually use Ansible to create YAML. So basically, I split the work in two. I had one Ansible playbook that would pull all the data and export it as YAML, and another Ansible playbook that would then take that YAML input and deploy it to the network. To make it easier, I wrote a little plugin so people who were working in Netbox could go like, right, I made some changes, send, and then it would automatically create the export and put it in Git. So we use GitLab, but you can use other systems as well. So what happened is they changed something in Netbox, they created an export in GitLab, it created a new branch, and GitLab has a nice merge request feature where you can see like the old version and the new version side by side. You can see what's changing, and that was already a massive improvement for the change manager, because things didn't just change; they were in a separate branch. He could view a diff, he could see the changes, and then say, okay, this is allowed to be merged. That one is not ready yet. Like this change can happen tonight. That change can happen tomorrow night. So by putting in that extra step, it was a bit more work, but because the workflow got longer, but it gave so much more insight into what was happening that suddenly the team was happy to use the automation. You know, what good is a tool if nobody wants to use it? So this is how it went. Like I said, change manager approves it. When it's okay, you merge the change into the main or trunk or whatever you call it. But you also have the advantage that if things go wrong, you can actually undo that merge and go like, okay, deploy the old configuration. Because if you have the same input data, then you also should get the same output data. So at that point, you not only have a verifiable change that you can approve and run when convenient, but you also have a backup. So this way made it a lot easier. And just doing it this way meant that instead of like, it used to be their tickets would have like a list like, we're going to execute these commands at 3 a.m. So somebody would open up their terminal, log into the router, hopefully the right one, sometimes it was the wrong one, copy paste the commands into the router, see if there was an error, do some checks, roll it back. But this was all at 3 a.m. when they just had been sleeping, so not clear-headed. So there was always a risk. Now with this workflow, the change got approved. The only thing the engineer needed to do at 3 a.m. Was actually merge the configuration into the main set and run Ansible, and Ansible would do all the typing for them. And if the Ansible scripts were well written and well tested, most importantly, then you actually had a much smaller risk in the maintenance windows at night. So this worked. Now, of course, I like to play with things, so this wasn't enough for me. I actually went further. So there's a couple of things that that still cause issues. Like if you have multiple changes queued up, then it's gonna look weird because you apply one change, but the other change is still referencing the old state. So what you need to do is you need to rebase it. Like we now want to apply this change to the new state. Well, of course, I wrote a script for that to do it automatically. This is called in GitLab, you have CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, which basically means you can run scripts and run tasks whenever things happen to your Git repository. So it's like, okay, when somebody makes a merge, then all the other changes are now based on the new version instead of the old version. When somebody actually does the merge, so you got the change approved, you click the merge button, it would actually automatically run Ansible. So the moment you click merge in the GitLab interface, you just saw a window open and it was just doing the changes in the background, so you didn't even need to do that manually. What we also did, and this was really easy because it was a Juniper. In Juniper, you can push a new configuration, but then not commit it. So in a Cisco, when you're old-style Cisco iOS, every time you type a configuration command, it applies instantly. So, but in Juniper, you can give it a whole new config, and then just say, show me the changes. So instead of looking at the source data that we're putting into it, we could actually see the resulting changes on the other end. So, and I wrote a little script for that, so that it would actually, when somebody created a merge request, it would generate the new configs, push the new configs to the Juniper, do a show diff to see all the resulting changes, then not commit them, don't apply them, just use it as a syntax check and to get the changes, and then the output from the router would be appended to the merge request. So you could actually see, like, this is the input data that changed, this is the output configuration changes that will happen because of this, and then the moment you click merge, you knew exactly what was going to change. And I built that whole set, and like for everybody, this is one of those custom things. Like, it's not a project you can open source because everybody's workflow is different and companies have different team compositions and requirements. But I found out that this worked really well. It became so easy to just queue up some changes, tell somebody to run them at 3 in the morning. Could have possibly been a cron job if I really wanted to. Another thing I did also was I did a nightly Ansible run that checked for certain things that we didn't want, because obviously people sometimes spot an error and go in and quickly fix it manually, but then you start automating things, but with all the manual changes it still becomes a mess. So you can also then have recurring tasks that check if anybody made any manual changes and send them an email saying, hey, what are you doing here? So before I go to the next one, the main thing here was that the change manager felt in control again, but also the rest of the network engineers. One of the problems I ran into was that they were like, yeah, but we only get to put something in Netbox and click a button, like the value I feel from doing my job is diminished. I don't have any autonomy, somebody writes the templates and I just get to execute them, while before I had enable access on a router and I could do stuff. So this is another thing that is a cultural change and not so much a technical change. In the end, we sold it to the engineers saying, like, yes, all the boring stuff that we can automate is now automated, so you have more time to spend on interesting work. And in the end, they accepted that. But when you're doing automation, you're changing the roles of people in your team. And that bit is much more difficult than writing an Ansible script. So, yeah, this is the workflow where we ended up with. We have data, which get put in GitLab. The green person is the change manager who will then approve it. And only when it's approved will it be used by Ansible to deploy to the routers. And this worked remarkably well. So, Ansible bits, the configuration, that's the easy bit. The workflow is where I see most automation projects fail. Now, it's definitely worth it. Like I said, no more midnight typos. People start to use it to know what's happening when. So in the end, people have more visibility and they feel more confident. But it's definitely a process, and yeah, don't underestimate it. Really talk to your team, see which roles are affected and how you can make sure those people still feel in control. Questions? Ooh, Nishal is walking to the microphone. Now I'm scared. Hello.
Hello, my name's Alan. I'm from AS37199. Can you give us some examples of what goes wrong? When you've taken the network down, what mistakes did you make? Can you share that with us so we don't make the same mistake?
Of course. So I was lucky because this customer was switching from Cisco to Juniper. And we actually had some DWDM wavelengths we weren't using. So we were building this in parallel to the production network. So I was quite safe. But yeah, things that went wrong is, for example, we use the data in Netbox to generate descriptions. Like in Netbox, you see which interface on this side is connected to which interface on that side. So we would we would use that for the description. So the interface would automatically get the description like this interface goes over there. If it had data on which path it took, it even included that in the description. It would also check the OSPF areas based on certain tags. It would do BGP configurations. And what happened is that somebody was in the middle of a change. So something used to be a customer port, but was now becoming a backend port. And they already reconfigured the core router, but they hadn't changed the information in Netbox about the other side of the link. So suddenly the OSPF areas didn't match, and the BGP settings didn't match, and stuff started breaking down all over the place.
Sorry, follow-up question. You mentioned Netbox there. Sorry, can I leave the mic on now? I think just for questions. You mentioned Netbox. We have used Netbox because we thought we had to type in everything manually. Do you have scripts to get things into Netbox and out of Netbox as well?
Of course, I wrote some custom stuff, but yeah, no, it's. I was actually for a while I was a Netbox core dev. I actually helped on the core team there until I had a big falling out with the main developer, and there's another fork of Netbox called Nautobot. They actually build better onboarding tools, so you can have a look at those because the Nautobot.
Spell it.
N-A-U, can I have the slides back? It's on the slides somewhere.
Nauto, N-A-U-T-O.
Yeah. So, but yeah, because the main developer of Netbox refused to write such tools because he was like, no, my system is the source of information. You're not importing any crap into it. That was a conscious choice back in the day. So, yeah. Anyway, I'll leave the ranting until the beer.
Hi, Graham from the internet. Alan actually stole most of my question. In a scenario where you starting from scratch from a new network, building it up from nothing, it's very easy to document and to build up the documentation and work from there. When you've got an existing network and you're trying to get on that journey to automation, getting the true and clear view of what's actually going on seems to be a big problem. And yes, as you say, onboarding with Nautobot is fundamentally handled differently to Netbox. Have you got any other comments on how you get everything in at the beginning, particularly with a network that is still operationally running while you're trying to get up to speed with automation?
So yeah, the bit I developed this for was a new network, so that was easy. But they had, like the data centers were full of Cisco 2950s, 2960s, you know, that era of hardware. And you could actually, when looking at the config, you could make a guess in which year it was configured. Because, you know, the standards moved, but they never went back to the old hardware to update them to the new standards. So like, oh, they configured it here in this way. Oh, so that's a newer switch then. So what we did is use the same system, especially when doing the diffs on the resulting config, because you put it in the way you think it should be now, and your diff will actually show you, like, if you would run this is what's going to change. So even so, you automate it, but you don't actually deploy it yet. You automate it. You compare what's being automated versus what's on the device. That gives you a list of all the old configs and legacy stuff and all the stuff that's out there. And then you have to go through that bit by bit to see, okay, this bit is actually a valid exception to the rule, so this bit we have to do something with. This is just old stuff that actually does need to be replaced by a modern config. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but you can do it incrementally, and you can automate just like, if you start with simple things like make sure the DNS settings are right, the host name is right, the ACLs, radius settings, all that kind of stuff. Even then you'll find lots of things where, for example, one of your radius servers is missing in the config on half the devices. and the other half is missing the other one. So there's going to be that kind of stuff, because if it's not automated, it's going to deviate. Like if you have a manual process that involves 50 steps, on average, and my gut feeling is that everybody performs 48 of them, but there's always the two that are missing are in different places everywhere. So if you have a network that's been manually configured for a decade or more, there's going to be little bits and pieces everywhere, and yeah, you do have to go over that and clean that up. But if you automate the deployment, you can at least automate the validation and the checking. But yeah, it's a lot of work.
Hi, Nishal, no hats.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks, that was an interesting talk. I want to move this to the middle because I like it being in the middle. It seems to me, and I'm not an automation expert, that there's something missing here. Right? So you've got what you want the intended config to look like, but surely there should be something that you can test this against. Now, big network operators model their networks, and there are a lot of fantastic, very expensive modeling tools that you can use to do this that cost more than the wine farm that's next to us. But there are also some fantastic developments in newer modeling engines, pieces of software that we can use. I'm not familiar with it, but I know of Container Lab. Are there other such tools that you could suggest to folks that might be useful, and maybe fill that into the timeline that you've built for how to do things?
So there's a couple of them for simulation that are probably quite well known, but you have GNS3 is one of them, where you can drag and drop and build a network and run devices. EVE-NG is another one where you can simulate it. And yes, what we actually did at this customer, we had 2 racks of test equipment, which was, of course, so we had like from every type of box, we had 1 or 2 in the lab. But that's, of course, never enough to simulate a whole network. So what we did is we would test all the automation on the physical boxes first. Then the next step would be we would actually test them connected to a virtual lab that emulated a bit more of the network. And after we tested all of that, then we would move it to production. And even then, probably deploy it against 1 or 2, saying deploy to everything and run it everywhere.
Okay, right,
so
thanks. That was going to be my next thing, which is why didn't you try it on one of these software, are there gotchas we should be aware of?
In this case, we used Juniper, so I used VMX, which is the virtual MX series router. We had 2 or 3 real MXs in the data center, and we would test against the combination of that before going to production.
Hi there, name's Joe. I was wondering if you could share more insight into the politics between Nautabot and this other one. I played with them for a little while, installed both, couldn't really work out what's happening. Then I think the one raised more funding, and I was just very confused. My use case was actually a DNS automation, so if you have any insights there.
Yeah, that's an area I haven't done a lot of automation in, so I can't help you there. What I did do with Ansible is just generate config files. I mean, Ansible is really good. You give it a template, and it just merges the data into a text file. And then once the text file is generated, you just run a bind reload or NSD reload or unbound reload or whatever you're doing. So at that point, you're just generating text files, and that can apply to a lot of tasks. No, the thing that why I left Netbox, I'll keep it to my own part of it, is that at this ISP we were doing a lot of DWDM. So I actually wanted to be able to trace from an interface, from that interface, the cable goes to this patch panel, comes out at that patch panel, then goes into this MUX channel X, which is then on this circuit to this other building, where the DMUX splits it out again, goes through this patch panels to that device. Like we're actually doing the full cable trace between buildings, between devices. And one thing that didn't work in Netbox, that is if there is a leased line circuit in your path, it would stop the trace there. But I was like, no, I know I'm on this wavelength on this circuit, but I also want to know where it comes out at the other end. So I built the logic for that code multiple times, and the main developer kept breaking it because he didn't consider it a valid use case. And at some point, after it got broken for the, I don't know how many time, I just gave up and was like, I'm sorry, but you may not consider this a use case, but there are people relying on this. And his answer was, well, I never said it was a supported use case, so therefore I don't have to care about whether it works or not. I'm simplifying a lot here, but and I'm a bit grumpy about it, so I'm biased. Don't take my word for it. But that's kind of the interaction that went on. Like I had some things that I really wanted supported, and they were just not considered important enough for other developers. And when Nautobot split off, that was actually the old employer of the Netbox developer, and they split it off. The first thing they did was ask me for my changes so they could fix it in their version. So that's why I get along with them better. But again, special use case and very biased person speaking here.
I'm Rish from ISOC. Maybe a question for those who are still hesitating to go into automation. What advice would you give to balance between going into network automation and possibly keeping control on the existing? So is there, yeah?
So for existing networks, I would say start with the simple things and just expand from there. Depends on how uniform your operation is as well. Like if you have a small data center and lots of different customers with different requirements, at that point automate the basic things, but every customer configuration is going to be so different that if you want to build templates and processes and workflows for all of them, you're going to spend more time building your workflows than actually running them. So at that point, that's definitely not worth it. If you are looking at, for example, a core network where you really want to make sure that every core router follows a strict standard and is configured in the same way, that's a much better target for automation. And we even had the policy, like we would actually let Ansible just overwrite the whole config. Like it would ignore the current config, just put in the new config, and that was going to be the config. So if people wanted to make manual changes, within 24 hours those changes would be rolled back because Ansible would have overwritten them. And that was a feature, because we were like, the core net devices need to follow the specs. We don't want any surprises there. And we don't want any custom fiddling with settings on that end. Now on the side where the customers are connected, where you have lots of different use cases, lots of different things, obviously you need to allow for more flexibility in what people do on the routers. But yeah, that would be my balance. If you can have a part of the network that needs to be super stable, automate everything. If you have a part of the network where you just need security, those basics. Roughly. And I just saw a sign that I'm running out of time, so I guess it's time for me to go.
Thanks, Sander.
Very quick question, Donald Jolly. If I want to learn more about this, how would I go about that?
I completely forgot to mention that. So on Thursday, I'm running a tutorial on automation. I'm going to start real low level, like very, very basics of Ansible, because Ansible is what most people use these days. So it's going to be a very entry-level presentation. No prior skills except a little bit of Linux or BSD command line required. And then depending on who is attending and how it goes, we can move into more advanced concepts. But yeah, that's going to be on Thursday the whole day.
Sander. Before we move on to our